of the story which I preached last week. Remember the story of the rich young man. In the middle of the story, between the story of the rich young man and this one, the story of blind Bartimaeus, is that other wonderful incident when the two disciples of Jesus, James and John, come to him and say, you know, we really like to sit at your right and left hand when you come into your glory. And so there's the rich young man, and there's James and John, and then there's blind Bartimaeus. Now, Mark, wonderful, he's just wonderful. I love to read these stories because they are just full of these incredible action verbs. And your mind's eye can literally see the story if you really listen hard to the words that he uses. This story is the last story in the gospel, in Mark's gospel, of Jesus' miracle stories. Now the ministry of Jesus to the folks, the earthly ministry of Jesus is going to be coming to an end. This is the last miracle as Jesus and the disciples are ascending the road out of Jericho to Jerusalem for the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. So this blind Bartimaeus story is just before the crucifixion of Jesus. They came to Jericho, and he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. Shh! But he cried out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. And then Jesus stood still and said, Call him here. And they called the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, get up, and come to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me see again. Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and followed Jesus on the way. Thus ends the reading of the word. Now, they came to Jericho, city below Jerusalem, about 11 miles south of Jerusalem, and you have to climb a mountain to get to Jerusalem. So these people with Jesus, these disciples, and Mark tells us a large crowd, are trekking to Jerusalem. They're going there for Passover. They're going there to celebrate the Passover holidays. Now, here is this, picture this, here is this blind beggar by the side of the road. Now, this is not a man who's witnessed Jesus in action. He hasn't seen Jesus in concert at the Greek. He's never seen what Jesus can do. He's heard the name Jesus of Nazareth, but he knows nothing really about Jesus. Now, the people who are with Jesus do. The people who are with him, the crowd that is walking with him, the disciples that are with him, have seen Jesus in action. They know who Jesus is. Well, maybe. We'll just say they've seen him in action. Now, Mark is very consistent and very persistent in letting us know that the disciples of Jesus don't get it. And they never get it. But it's important for us to know that and realize that. Now, before I go on with the story, I'm going to ask you to decide where you are in the story. Are you going to be blind Bartimaeus? Are you going to be in the crowd that you can't be Jesus? You can never be Jesus. But you can be in the crowd, okay? You can be marching with the disciples. You can be one, pick a disciple if you want to be a disciple. And there are girl disciples in the entourage. Remember that. You could choose from 8 of them. There are girl disciples in the entourage, so you can be among, or you might be among the beggars, who are along the side of the road. But pick somebody, please. Don't yourself out of the story. That's why these stories exist. So we can be part of it. These are real people. Okay. So here we have the entourage going along the road, and we have this blind man yelling from the side of the road, Jesus, son of David. Now, for many of you, you'll think, well, son of David, he must mean David, not David Smith, come on. King David, okay? So there are people who go, son of David, okay, that must mean he's a descendant of King David. But then there are others who say, well, son of David refers to David's son, King Solomon, who was the son par excellence and who had a reputation not only for being a wise king with some pretty funky proclivities, but a wise king who was a healer and a magician. So when Bartimaeus says, son of David, he may very well have a picture in his mind of this Solomon-like character, this magician, this healer, and heaven only knows where he got the idea. He's never seen the man. He only knows the name. Now, as he yells from the side of the road, the disciples and the crowd, all who have these blinders on, we're going to Jerusalem, and we don't want to see anything around us. We're headed on the road. They stop and they say, will you please be quiet? We have an agenda here. We are on our way to Jerusalem. You cannot disturb the leader. You cannot disturb Jesus. You need to be quiet. I can just picture them going, shh. So what does he do? Yeah, he yells louder. Of course. Of course. Now this is what's so interesting about Mark. Because Jesus stops. And I always love to picture, the members of the entourage crashing into each other as Jesus stops suddenly. But Jesus doesn't turn to Bartimaeus and say, come on over. Jesus, in his own inimitable fashion, just like he did in the feeding stories with the disciples, when the disciples said, these people are here, it's late, they need to go to the 7-Eleven and get themselves some food, and Jesus says, no, you get them something to eat. In this story, he turns to the disciples and he says, you who have shushed him, you who have told him to be quiet, call him over here. Okay, he said you should come over. Just picture the behavior of these disciples who've just been so naughty and so mean to Bartimaeus now have to scurry around and change their behavior and have to go over and say, okay, take heart. He's calling you over. Come on over. The beauty of Mark is that he tells us in that moment that Bartimaeus doesn't get up and brush himself off. Bartimaeus immediately throws off his cloak, and that's the verb that's used. He throws off his cloak and he jumps up. Now, the gesture of throwing off his cloak is so symbolic. He throws off old life. He throws off current life. He throws off now, and he jumps up to go to Jesus. And the word that's used in the Greek is anastemi. And this word in Greek is translated, he rises up as if rising from the dead. If you were to read it in Greek, you'd go, oh my goodness, isn't that poetic? He rises up, he jumps up, he leaps up, as if he is being born again, as if he is being reborn, as if he is rising from the dead. And this blind man jumps up and he runs to Jesus. The disciples don't walk over there and take him by the arm and lead him to Jesus. He jumps up and he goes himself and face to face with Jesus. Face to face with Jesus. Jesus says, what is it you want me to do for you? he says simply, I just want to see again. The story is of the man who once saw. The story is of a man who once had vision. The story is of a man who was put in the position of having to become a beggar to survive because he lost his sight. We don't want to spend a whole heck of a lot of time trying to figure out how he lost his sight. He had a motorcycle accident or something like that. But he lost his sight. He lost his vision. But the one person in this story who really sees is Bartimaeus. The one person in this story who really has spiritual sight is Bartimaeus. He sees what the disciples and the crowd can't see. He sees that faith is going to give him new life. Just my faith in you. I believe in you. I have faith in you, Son of David. Jesus says to Bartimaeus just what he said to the woman with the hemorrhage, who, when she touched the fringe of Jesus' garment, knew in that moment in time that she had been healed. Jesus never touched her. Jesus never touches Bartimaeus. Jesus does not effect a cure. He doesn't blow on him. He doesn't touch his eyes. He doesn't pray over him. He looks at him and he says, go. Your faith has made you well. Go. Your faith has made you see again. Of course. How the heck would he have jumped up and run to Jesus if he couldn't already see? His faith, his belief in what was possible in Jesus made him well. The man in this story teaches us, gives us insight. The man in this story tells us to see. The man in this story, that man once blind, tells us to look at what's possible. Last Sunday, we talked about the rich young man who walked away from Jesus because he didn't see the possibilities that were open to him. He didn't know how to follow. He didn't know how to ask for what he needed. He didn't know how to ask for help, and so he turned and he walked away when he was called, when he was invited to join. Here Bartimaeus is brave enough to say, this is what I need. And Jesus tells him, already, your faith has made you well. All things are possible with your faith. I'm going to tell you one final little story. I was listening to NPR late the other night when I was coming home from rehearsal. And there was a story on NPR about a man by the name of Tony Difel. Tony Difel teaches photography. He teaches photography to people who are blind. And he has students who are completely blind. And he has students that may have, can distinguish between a little bit of light and shadow. And he has students who can use those magnifying machines to read a bit. But he teaches them to take photographs. And they take photographs, and you say, how can they take photographs? They take photographs by sound. And somebody asked one of the students, well, how do you not cut the heads off the people, who you take pictures of? They said, well, I just ask them where they are. And he speaks about one young lady, Lawanda, who took pictures, oddly enough, of the sidewalk. And Tony said, what are you taking pictures of the sidewalk for? I mean, what's on the pavement? Is there some pavement? And she said, no, there are cracks in the sidewalk. And my cane gets stuck in the cracks. And the people who are in the wheelchairs are in trouble going over these cracks, and sometimes they slide right off the pavement because of these cracks in the sidewalk. I'm going to tell the superintendent of the school about these cracks. So she wrote the superintendent of the school a letter saying, you who have the privilege of sight. Isn't that interesting? You, sir, who have the privilege of sight, do not notice the cracks. They don't bother you. You can go around them. But I have trouble, and they catch my cane, and they do damage, and they make me fall. Would you please fix the cracks in the sidewalk? This blind girl, by taking a picture of cracks in the sidewalk, made change happen for all sorts of people. She made change happen for all of the people who were being injured by the cracks that the people who had sight didn't see. Bartimaeus and LaWanda are the people who are trying to help us understand that we must see everything that's around us. We must notice everything that's around us. We must participate. If we are disappointed in the things that the world hands us, we have faith in God. We don't have faith in the world. We don't have faith in the system. We don't have faith in the recovery of the economic situation. We don't have faith in the real estate recovery. We have faith in God and faith in Jesus Christ and faith that all things are possible.